All right, it's 10 a.m. We're gonna go ahead and get started. I think this is everyone who's gonna be here today. We have a couple people who can't make it. Shannon's joining us via Zoom. I did not print an agenda because the only thing we're gonna talk about today is this idea about a policy document. Adeline's joining us today, thank you.
Just wanted to check you out, sorry.
Yeah, of course. And you know everybody, I think, yeah, okay. So the last time we met, I handed out some paperwork. It's when we got started again this year, we talked about one of the goals of the group is trying to develop some sort of a program or policy or framework for the town board specifically to use if we come across a property or have a property in mind that might be worthwhile to purchase to protect or place an easement on to protect, because we have ideas. We have some grant programs we've used in the past, but as you all know, we don't have like a set guidance document or policy beyond our planning documents, which are great and have lots of information, but they don't really set forth, hey, here's the steps, let's make it easy for you, here's what you can do if you find a property. So I was talking with Doug about this a couple months ago, and when we were talking about the budget for next year, about maybe we need some outside help to develop a policy, or maybe we need to maybe that should be one of the goals. So I said, well, let's let our team take a crack at it first. Let's see what we can come up with, see if we can draft something that makes sense. And then, if we need more help, we'll take it from there after the new year.
You're talking about how to purchase or what to purchase?
Both.
Okay.
So as you know, being town board, we have all of our policies and procedural documents. So what I did is I took those, looked through them, kind of saw how a lot of our policies, because our policies basically give the town board direction on how to go through a process, whether it's planning for the end of year financials, or general purchasing, we have a procurement policy, or when to replace a vehicle, So we have a lot of these documents. It just makes things standardized, makes it easier for the town to operate, and it just makes things easier. So that was where the idea came from to come up with the policy. So I looked at all those, I tried to see how they were all set up, their bits and pieces, and put together this draft. And that's what I passed out last time to all of you guys. And Shannon, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. I'm gonna bring it up on the screen too, because I know Adeline, you don't have one. So.
Sarah, what you passed out and what you circulated are two different documents, and you changed it.
I did change it.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's why I mentioned it when I sent the email last Friday. This has changed from what I handed out, because I keep working on it.
Make sure we're all on the same document.
And then I printed one today that I worked on today, so. But that's because I left my notebook at home, so.
By the way, in the Trails Master Plan, there's a whole section on how to purchase, options and how to purchase different properties.
Yeah, well, and a lot of this stuff, there's nothing in here we don't already know, but putting it into a document that's more official, that ultimately, if the town board likes it or not, matters. But when I was talking with Doug about it, it's nicer if we have it all in a package.
Mm-hmm.
It just kind of lays out, hey, here's what we have, here's what some other things, and this is how we can do it. And then also it just, right now, sometimes when we come across a property, if it's not something that's already in the works, like the piece of property next to McJanet Park was a nice example of one that was easy, right? In the Trails Master Plan, it lays out our ultimate goal of connecting Ononda Park with, the Uplands area and with McJanet Park, and we've talked about this in other plans.
It was affordable.
It was affordable, it was available, it's not developed, it's a nice chunk of woods. That one was easy, but sometimes there might be other parcels that are not so easy, and Adeline, you wouldn't know this, but this group, we've been talking about the maps a lot, and how we have a lot of wonderful maps that show us a lot of great information about parcels that are important for one reason or another, but none of them really all agree, because each map shows us something different, and that's something this group was talking about last time. So the hopes is that we might be able to come up with a new map eventually, or new maps, or update existing maps. We're gonna talk with Labella, who created most of our open space related maps, next month about the possibility of doing that. But that would also become part of this policy too, or that's the idea anyway. So, sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Can I jump in?
Yes.
Here. So it's become really apparent to me that we would need a step-by-step process, because most
Yes.
people who are familiar with space that might be desirable are not in tune to the process. And I will tell you why, because I have that space. And when Kevin was here, was he here last month, or at CIC, I think he was.
Kevin Mulvaney?
Yeah, he mentioned land along Menteith Creek and how important it was, and I have access to land, so I talked to him about it. He actually has looked at it, and he called me last week and told me that it absolutely is a space that would be suitable for a conservation easement. And he sent Doug a long email that he didn't copy me on, which is good. And the issue next is to find the money for it. So none of those steps are outlined anywhere.
Right.
On how to do that, who to contact, what happens when you contact somebody, who comes out and looks at it, who makes the ultimate decision that it would be valuable property, where do you go for funding, what are the funding sources, how do you apply for funding, and then
Yeah.
cover the whole thing.
And my brain is like just going as you're saying these things, and the first answer is, answers to each of those questions are different based on what your ultimate goal is.
Exactly.
Because there might be 5 different people you could call, but it depends on what you want to do with the land as to who you might call first.
And that was really apparent, because I have very specific issues I wanted to cover. But the average home, property owner wouldn't necessarily know that the town can allow you to, number one, keep it in the family name and allow the family to live there forever and ever, and allow improvements on a home if there's a home on the property. I mean, all those things come under each section, and
Right.
wow.
I just
Yeah.
tell them to call Sarah Reynolds at the town hall. That's
The
what
what?
I literally tell people to call Sarah if they have any interest in it.
It's
That's what I say to
just,
Well, and
I
I
mean-
only know a little bit, I mean, I've gotten familiar with the farming, but I'm just now learning more about, non-farm easement
Mhm.
processes. The town, we haven't done that much.
Mhm.
But that's a good point you bring up about landowners needing to know the information. So do you remember when this team first started, I passed out a sheet of paper, I think it's 2-sided, that's information directed to landowners specifically, that kind of lists some programs and contacts for if you have a piece of land that you want to protect. Not the matrix, there's another one, I know I gave you guys a lot of stuff.
I remember, yeah.
But yeah, it kind of said, it explained what the easement was, and if you wanted to be involved with the town in that process, here's some things you could do, or if you don't want the town to be involved, here's some things you can do, and groups you can call, like the land trust and so forth. Yeah, so that document and a policy document are made for like the opposite groups, right? That document is more informative for landowners, which at some point I think we should work on that too. This document would be an official town policy more directed for staff and town board and elected officials.
Before I forget, if you have anything like the document you're talking about that you can give to anybody, that'd be great for the environmental fair on the October 22nd.
Yeah, so the one I was just talking about that she was looking for, the group, we didn't go over it yet, but there's really nothing in there that's
version.
No, I mean, it's just information, so I mean, we could print some.
That'd be great to have. 'cause
It's,
especially we've got some folks
It
in
lists like,
Yeah, I've got it here in front of me, if that helps, Sarah.
like, like it talks about the PDR program, if you wanna work with the state, there's a federal program that's similar, if you wanna work with them. It lists our local land trusts, I can't remember if I included all of them, but the Finger Lakes Land Trust, Genesee Land Trust and so forth, so people can just go directly to the land trusts if they want, if it's farmland and they wanna work on those grants, they have to come through us, or a land trust, they can't do it on their own. Just stuff like that. It also mentioned, we haven't done much of this, but the town is legally allowed to just have easements on property, hold an easement, so, we haven't done much of that, but anyway, yeah, it's just informative. I don't see why we couldn't print that. It also has information about where landowners would go and where they'd get information about, tax breaks.
Perfect. That'd be great.
It's not through the town, there's no tax breaks through the town, but anyway. So back to the policy document. It's very basic draft form right now, and like Chuck said, I keep working on it, so it keeps changing, but the basics aren't a whole lot different. I just fleshed out some of the outlines since last week, and I'll email it to you guys. I just didn't want to print it out because I knew there was a good chance people would make suggestions today, and I wanted to wait until I incorporated those before I sent it again. But I got some comments from Gary Kopersberger. Tom gave me a couple comments. Most of it was clarifying some information. Tom brought up a good point about that the policy does not mention anything about the actual funding sources, like our open space fund and our parks fund.
Yeah,
So I threw that in the draft that you don't have. But I have to talk to Doug and Kate about that to make sure that I want them to write down that part. I put in a note to myself to put it in there, but to make sure I say the right thing, because our fund, open space funds and parks funds are very specific as to how you can spend the money and when and why and all that, so. But just in general, does anyone, after you guys read it, is there anything that stands out that you like or don't like, or
looking
anyone
at
kind of go around the room if anyone has comments?
overall, Sarah, I was sort of looking at this as a what, where, how type. So, I mean, the what and where is the identifying the potential parcels. I mean, they're the things that we're focused on. And then comes the how, which is the methods of protection, what funding has to be provided, and the approvals and decisions have to be made. And I'm thinking maybe they should be in sort of that order rather than sort of jumping from methods of protection to what parcels were we trying to target, and then going back to what approvals have to be made, and then where's the funding come from? So I guess it's more the formatting. That's what I'm thinking about. I don't know if
Yeah,
everyone else sort of agrees. It just sort of jumped around.
do the
and
categories make sense?
the
Because I kind of did the same thing.
categories
In
make
my mind, I
sense.
was like, what, where, when, why, and how?
But maybe the order should be changed.
And I'm
So
all
they.
ears on that,
Mhm.
The order is important.
yeah.
Yeah, you wanna-
Because the average
what are we
person
going
needs
after?
step by step, yeah.
Yeah,
And
so I guess the first thing would be is,
would
I
be
guess it's,
identifying the
'cause
potential
sometimes,
parcels.
yeah, I guess so.
Mhm.
Unless you just, someone calls the town, hey, I have a parcel, do you want it? That,
Who's your audience for the document? Is
You
this for-
guys.
Okay, that's what.
because you got, the town board will be the ultimate decision makers, right? It's up to you guys if the town wants to buy land. It's up to you guys what we're gonna do with it. And it's up to you guys if we don't wanna buy it, if we wanna put an easement on it and all that. But, as just saying, here, town board, here's a piece of land, you figure it out.
Mhm.
That's, that's burdensome. So I guess the point of this is help you decide if it's worthy of purchasing, help you decide if you should purchase it or put an easement on it, and give you the options for programs that are available. And then,
Yeah, I suggest that if you have anything in there about creating an option to purchase, that you suggest that it have a maximum amount on it.
I didn't even put that in there.
Right.
But since we've done that before,
Yeah,
you're right, it probably should be
I would
included.
add that in there, because that was, I think that's been an issue with our current option to purchase, that there's no maximum amount. And so it's hard to sell or share with anybody if you don't know what amount you're potentially putting yourself into, so.
Hmm.
Because they're almost always purchased on some sort of average of an appraisal, so. And sometimes when you're working with, 1 acre lot that the neighbors sold, you know exactly what that's gonna be. Sometimes when it's like frontage, it's a range of $1 to $3 million, which is, tough to do.
Now this gets into the weeds, but if there was a maximum amount, would it end up, that's just what you end up paying?
No, you could still write it with, the
Oh,
average
the
of these two
appraisal
things. the
still does it,
appraisals,
but
yes,
not to exceed.
but not to exceed X amount, so I came into this purchase agreement already existing, and if it had that, I was very surprised it didn't have a not to exceed amount. And if it had that, I mean, our entire conversations might have been very different on the topic, so.
So is the not to exceed, you're saying like $1 million or whatever?
Don't spell out what amount,
Or-
just say put it in there, so there has to be an agreed top number.
Oh, for each,
Yeah.
I got it.
So
I got
yeah,
it.
if there was a parcel,
Yeah.
there would be a standard for option agreement, is what she's suggesting, that case by case basis for that particular property, when they draft the option agreement, they agree on a max.
It could be something like not to exceed the current assessment, or not to exceed 50% of the current assessment,
it could be-
things like that.
It
You
could
would
be a
have to,
number, it could be anything.
well, it would have to be based on something that is already quantified. I mean, because you just can't pull a number
Right.
out of.
So the
thin air.
suggestion
You
would be that,
could, I mean,
Well-
I'm just saying, I want there to be, I want it to be in the policy, if we're writing a purchase agreement, that there needs to be a number in there that says not to
Not to
exceed,
exceed.
that there needs to be a not to exceed number.
Exactly, but you need a roadmap on how to get to that not to exceed.
Because each piece of property is going to be different, and
Exactly,
as we
right.
continue to look at these maps and kind of cross-reference them, we're gonna assign different values to different parcels. So will that number be based on that, or would it be based on market indicators?
I frankly think that it should be, I'm assuming that our assessments are nearly correct
No.
for the value of the property. They will be.
next year, hopefully they
Yeah.
will be.
That is, you have to start somewhere, so I would say, it's 10 acres and it's assessed at $100,000, so not to exceed 25% of the current assessment, or 50% of the current assessment, acre per acreage assessment, something like that.
You're saying for an easement?
Yes.
Okay, I'm talking more about the option to purchase, not easements, so I mean, like, if the town wanted to actually, like the McJanet property, for example, if we wanted to purchase that property, currently we have this option to purchase, like RSM, for example.
Yeah, I understand.
And there's no spelling out whatsoever about what the cost would be, other than an average of two appraisals. If there had been, not to exceed $2.2 million or whatever, then there could have been a conversation about, it was more clear during this process than there has been able to be. So I don't think spelling out what the number should be and a policy for that for option to purchases is necessarily gonna be helpful, because that's gonna be different depending on what the value is of that property at the exact moment that they're getting appraised. But I do think that, at least if we do an option to purchase, that there is defined some sort of, whatever it makes sense at that moment, some sort of not to exceed amount that the town board can agree upon when they make the purchase agreement. I think that is gonna be important going forward.
But aren't we talking about conservation easements in here?
And purchasing.
And purchases, okay. All right, then I would.
Because sometimes.
So you'd have to have two different,
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
yeah, we put it
Plans.
in here separately, kind of for a lot of them, it's like whether you're going to purchase or place an easement on it.
Like your little flow chart thing, you've got them all in there, so.
Yeah, so, yeah, I mean, cause it could be either, just
Mhm.
depending on the available. So I guess, getting back to the order.
Yeah, can I go back to something you said earlier, Sarah, where these things start in one of two ways. Either we, the town, identify a parcel we want to go and try to acquire an easement on, or the landowner comes to us.
Yeah,
Maybe that's the starting point under the procedure, is identify this, this process will be kicked off in one of two ways, and kind of explain that, and then maybe what happens in each case until we get to the common points, and then actually fall into a procedure.
yeah, because regardless of whether you go out looking for it or the parcel comes to you, the rest of the processes would be the same.
Yep, that's what I was thinking too. Certainly, how it's evaluated, where funding would come from, all of that's gonna be the same. It's, I just think it should be identified that it's either gonna be proactive or reactive.
So you could start with saying, X piece of property has been identified, and the ways they can be identified are numerous, actually. But once you have a piece of property identified, go from there with 1, 2, 3.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that'd be really helpful.
Does that make sense to everybody else? Chuck, that kind of goes to your point. The first one is identifying the parcels.
Yeah, once you identify it, how you gonna get it,
Yeah. Okay,
and the process you have to go through, as far as the
so that,
cost,
yeah,
the approvals, and the methods. You have to decide what method you're gonna use first. Once you've targeted a property, then which method are you gonna use to acquire it? And then how are you going to acquire it, fund it? And then, once the funding's in place, then the board makes a decision whether there's thumbs
Sounds
up.
like you need a
thumbs
flow
down.
chart.
so identifying first and then, I think I have it in here, explain whether it's coming to.
Yeah, you have
you're
it,
going
it's
to
just
look for
the
it.
order, that's all.
And then the methods, and then. Sorry, I printed this and it's really tiny because it printed all the comments too, so now I can't even see what I wrote.
You make glasses?
I guess maybe I do.
You're right at that point now. Welcome to the world.
The eye doctor said,
1.5 O's.
he's like, I can give you some today, and I was like, no, I'm okay. He's like, you'll know when you need them.
Welcome to presbyopia.
They have readers
You
at
get
the
2.25.
drugstore, that you can get for $1.
2.25.
Oh, wow.
At the dollar
There.
store.
Okay, Chuck, can you say that again? So first
Oh, I'm
is
sorry.
the, like
First
what
is
you
the
and
method-
Shannon said. Identifying, here's the two
To
ways
identify
you're
the
gonna
potential
identify it.
parcels.
Second is the methods of
Yeah,
protection.
second would be the
whether
method.
you're gonna buy it or put an easement on it.
Mhm. And then, the method. And then I guess, along with that would be the cost, the cost,
Valuing the.
depending on whether you buy an easement,
Yeah.
acquire an easement, or you actually acquire the property.
So
And
the
then-
question is, do you do the methods, either you buy it in the easement and then underneath it, talk about costs? And then also that's separated, or do you think, kind of feel like some of the cost discussions, I don't know, they're different.
Well, before you go to the board, you gotta have everything laid out as to what you're gonna buy, how you're going to obtain it, either easement or fee simple, and where you're gonna get the money. Because I think the board wants to see that, you'd want to see that before you'd even
Mhm.
consider a decision as to whether you go ahead with it, so.
I think clarifying where the money should come from for a particular project is helpful.
Yeah,
Because
well,
then,
that's gonna,
and
very-
clarifying obviously, the only problem with that is where the money comes from depends on what kind of project it is, which you referred to earlier. I mean, if it's an
which would
open
happen in the
space.
identification.
Yeah.
So
Does it
when you have
qualify?
methods of acquisition, it's either an easement or a purchase. At that point, maybe this document should just focus on one whole for easements. Here's how you do it, here's the specifics of how we might go
Mhm.
about it, and here's how much it's gonna cost, and then switch over to purchasing.
Makes sense.
Instead of having, the way I have it in here is method,
Together.
easement, purchase, cost, easement, purchase.
Yep, I think
That
it
makes
has to be a twofold
Okay,
approach.
and then to complicate it even more, there's the outside funding,
Yeah,
which changes it again.
Every year.
Because then it's the difference between us doing this alone with our own funding or, you know, donations from the landowner or what have you, or us doing it with a grant, which changes.
And whether or not it needs a permissive referendum.
Right, and I think
But
the
some
use of
grants are-
open space funds is always subject to permissive referendum, I think.
I think so too.
But this policy doesn't have to go beyond saying that.
Yeah.
All right, so it sounds like I'm gonna trying to organize it.
Mhm.
I'm still not sure exactly how it needs to be organized, because I do think that the outside funding piece, maybe it could be broken apart and inserted into that other section. Because some of the outside funding is gonna be for easements.
Easement versus, yeah.
But there's other outside funding programs, which I hope come back next year, that came out this year, which are for, that also have options for purchasing, but they just refund you, reimbursing you for purchasing land too.
Under easements, are we just looking at public easements or private easements?
Well, we don't, right? So with our farmland easements, they're all private.
So I'm thinking conservation subdivisions, where you have a conservation easement within, that's usually owned by an HO or maintained by an HOA. So where does that fit in here? If we, in the
I think
process
the
of,
process would still kind of be the same. If a developer says, I wanna develop this land, I wanna use the conservation subdivision, and does the town wanna hold the easement? At that point, the policy would come into play. Okay, here's, if we do, town board says, yes, we want to, then here's the policy for that.
but in some cases, it's the town telling the developer,
Right,
we want a conservation subdivision because there are natural resources on this property that we want to
right,
preserve.
which would then be us identifying a parcel that we want an easement on.
Do we pay them for conservation easement subdivision? I think so.
There are some cases where you do
should give
purchase
them
an easement.
They get smaller lots.
Yeah.
And in return.
My neighborhood.
Yep.
I just
That's
was
why this
wondering-
gets
That's the-
complicated, cause all the options are available, you know?
Yeah,
I mean, an easement may be donated to the town, or the town may purchase one. So like the farmland, the town purchased the easement using state money and our own funds, on farmland. So the landowner was financially compensated for the easement.
So maybe within the easement category, we should break it down further to public and private.
Yes, well, and that just depends on the easement language and the individual programs. Sometimes that's spelled out, or just the
Or
landowner
if it's a
themselves.
conservation subdivision where we're creating it.
I suppose in that case, we wouldn't even be interested unless it was public. If the town were to hold the easement and have to,
Well, we may be interested in preserving a forest or steep slopes or on a private property, and that would be the impetus for a conservation subdivision.
Yeah.
And we could refer to our policy that, you know, you have to do this, Mr. Developer, because our policy
don't
is
know-
trying to preserve that.
I don't know if the policy should go that far as to say whether things should or should not be private. I think that's a case by case decision.
Okay. Well, you know what I'm getting around to? I'm getting around eventually to the, who owns a conservation
Mhm.
easement within an HOA? Well,
That's
is it
what
an
I'm-
HOA or is it the town? And I guess,
and who's required to do the maintenance on it?
Well, that's decided.
Yeah.
well, right now, we're throwing everything on the HOA.
HOA, I know, but what if
With
they
the hope-
renege on it, you know?
That's exactly what I was gonna
Yes.
say, that there's a chance that the HOA could fold or,
Yeah.
Well, what matters is who's holding that easement. That's the ultimate person who's
well, yeah, and ultimately it
responsible.
comes back to the town.
Well,
If
usually
the
with like,
HOA folds,
with like stormwater, for example, if something happens and they're not maintaining it, it reverts back to the town, I think, at this point, so. So,
Well, this is a little different. So for example, the most recent farmland easement that we have is the Purdy's. They own the land.
Mhm.
It's not accessible to the public in any way, shape, or form.
Mhm.
The town holds an easement on the entire acreage, including the house and everything, but it's focused on the farmland. Our responsibility as the easement holder is that once a year we go and look and see if they're still doing what they said they were gonna do, and more importantly, not doing what they're not supposed to do. Now, I don't ever anticipate this with this landowner because they're just interested in farming it. If we say they don't own it anymore, and in 5 years from now, someone else owns it, and they built something in the middle of one of the farm fields. At that point, then we'd have to go and see what it was. Is it supporting, is it a shed, run-in shed for the horses? Or, is it a barn structure for storing something, or is it totally unrelated to ag? And if it's in the not allowed list, which the state lays out, because remember, this is state money, then we would be responsible for enforcing the easement legally with our money and our attorneys to make them put it back the way it was, or whatever the situation would be. So as an easement holder, it's our responsibility to make sure that whatever's written in the legal language for that easement happens and prevents whatever. So for conservation easements for not related to like a neighborhood development, it's all based on how the landowner and
pretty
the
cut and
easement
dry.
holder
Yeah.
wanted it to be, or within the confines of a state program. Sometimes that, like the ones we use with ag and markets, they define, what's allowed. But, it may be, say, using the McJanet parcel, for example. Now, the town purchased that, we own it, it's ours outright. But say that didn't happen. Say the owner said, well, we wanna retain ownership, but but you can hold an easement on it and we can have hiking trails or something on it. Then that would be kind of similar. So they could still retain ownership, but our easement would give to hiking or walking access on it. And that would all be defined in the easement, and maybe there would be things that they weren't allowed to do, like bar access from it or something. As the easement holder, we would be responsible for making sure all the rules, which are whatever's laid out in your easement language, were followed.
So then it becomes a deed, what do you call it?
Restriction.
Restriction.
Yeah.
For the landowner.
Encumbrance,
correct?
encumbrance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
And
it's
deed,
really
deed
complicated.
restrictions are passed on if
Property.
With the deed, yep.
that's, yeah,
Yep,
okay.
almost there.
there are
Somehow
such things
dissolved.
as conservation easements that are termed, like their limit, like, so you can place an easement on your property to, not cut any trees down or what have you, whatever the limits are, but it expires after a certain number of years. There are easements like
So
that, but
Why don't we ever in this area, I know like where my husband's from in Rhode Island, they do a lot of like 50-year leases, 100-year lease, things
a
like that.
lease.
Yeah, where there's, so that's how they preserve properties.
This is how the homes along the Erie Canal, how they stay residential. They sign a 100-year lease on it, and every year they make a lease payment to the New York Canal Association. And so, you're assured you have that property, hopefully for your lifetime. Yeah.
I'm just wondering why we never do anything like that here.
For what?
Well, I can see some people being like, until my grandkids are like a 50-year lease or something for their lifetime, not knowing what their grandkids are gonna wanna do with the property or something like that. You know what I mean? I can see that still appealing to somebody as an option.
Who's
If they don't want
leasing
a
it?
permanent, that's a good question. It could be the town, I guess. I don't know. I'm just wondering why we don't use that concept at all in this area.
Well, I mean, we lease land to farmers and they farm on it, and we own the land, the town.
Yeah, no, normal lease, like a 1 year, whatever. I'm just wondering why we never use that as an option for if someone's uncomfortable with an easement and there was a property that, that what I mean, that wanted to be preserved.
I think an
But
easement,
they
is
were
more-
concerned about the permanence of something. so.
yeah, I think that might be why. I mean, with a lease, they could just say, well, we don't want to do it anymore.
But if that's what I'm saying, they're usually long-term, like, like 50 or 100-year lease type
Something to look into.
structures. I'm just wondering why we don't really do it.
Does that ever come up when you're negotiating with a farmer that
We've never talked about.
they say, you say it's gotta be perpetual? And they say, well, I'd like to reconsider in 25 years. No,
We don't even talk to them. because we're not allowed to do that with the state program.
Oh,
It's either forever or you're not, you can't participate.
Okay.
okay. It is
So
fairly-
it's never come up because so far we've done this through the state and it's perpetual.
Okay.
Mhm.
And in my research, looking at these kinds of programs through other agencies, it's permanent. They're all permanent and they all use easements instead of leases. Probably because an easement is easier to protect legally.
Mhm.
I would imagine. I don't know, I'm just guessing.
Do,
Just throwing it out there, being weird.
other municipalities have I mean, we have an open space fund, Parks and Recreation Fund. Do they have funding in their budget that they add to on a regular basis to,
It depends. Some of
to
them,
support this type of thing?
some of them do, like our Parks Fund, you know, that's funded through new residences,
Yes,
$1,000,
yes,
right?
yeah.
But there are some, I keep coming back to the town of Warwick because they're the ones I read the most of, but they have an open space fund that's funded through transactional fees at closing. So when a parcel transfers ownership in the town of Warwick, I don't remember what the amount was, but a tiny percent of the purchase price, I think is where the percentage comes from, goes to their open space fund. So transactions, real estate transactions generate funding for their.
And ours is funded by excess
I guess it's
in,
legal.
The town board can decide at
it's
the end
legal
of
in
the
New York
year,
then to do it.
unexpended funds.
Yeah.
They can put it into the open space fund, and they have,
yes, I know that.
you know, on and off over the last few years. But yes, our open space fund will never grow unless the town board decides to grow it.
Mhm.
That's, yeah, it's not automatically being filled like the parks.
I see.
But yes, other towns
It's-
do it in a couple of different ways. Some of them do it the way we do it, some of them use like an
It's used a
automatic
fee-based
fee.
process.
Yeah, I think it's pretty easy to justify price per unit because you're bringing more people into the property,
Mhm.
into the town who want to use the facility, so
Mhm.
they've got to contribute to
Mhm.
the capital cost of those facilities. So
Right.
it's easy to justify.
And that's part of the consideration for living here, is our open spaces and our fine parks.
Right.
But the parks one, it's only if you're building a new house. If someone buys a house here that's already built,
And you
there's-
don't
it
provide a
doesn't
park,
generate,
and you don't provide park facilities.
yeah,
If the developer decides to put his own park in,
yeah, that's true, it
we
doesn't.
can't get the 1,000.
Well, considering that we have so much scenic views,
Yeah.
space that would be good for the town to have a conservation easement on, would it be wise to encourage the town board to add a fee for all closings, to add to the open space fund? Because, you know, anyone who moved, you move here for a job, but let me tell you, you don't have to move here for a job. You can move to Farmington, and they don't have the views that we have in this
Mhm.
town. And you move here because of the space you're going to be living in for a good period of time.
Amenities.
Talked to dozens and dozens of people in coffee shops, on Main Street, casual
It's just-
conversations, who have chosen to move here recently or say in the last decade, and that's a very common theme. I moved here because of the sense of a rural community, open space, scenic beauty, people coming in from Greece or Aranaquoy, that kind of, those kind of resources are so rare.
When we moved here, I worked in downtown Rochester, and we lived originally on Macedon Road, which was, you know, it was like living in Henrietta where we had lived previously. But then we built on Laurel Lane, and at that time, there was no Weifels Road, there was nothing on Middle Cheshire Road except a farm. And
You were in the country.
the first time we drove out Middle Cheshire Road, you come to that point by Butler Road where you see the view of the lake. That was it. I said, you know, if we can afford this house, I want to live here.
Mhm.
And I have never regretted that for one day because I can always come over that hill and see the
Right.
lake.
Right.
And people should be willing to pay for that.
So this is what Warwick does. So it's a real estate transfer tax. Each conveyance of real property or interest therein where over $500, the rate will be 0.75% of the consideration for the conveyance. So I think that means of the purchase
Less than
price.
1%.
Yeah.
0.75%, so just under
Less than a
1%.
tenth. So almost 1%
But 1
or almost a
million.
tenth of a
So
percent?
I was thinking that myself.
So you're talking 1 million, we'll take 1%.
It all adds up.
0.75%,
0.75.
Yeah, well,
not
not
0.075%.
0.075, so
So
0.75.
just under 1%,
Okay.
0.75.
yes.
0.75
Any
of the
purchase-
property or 0.75% of the property?
Close, I guess, the
Huh?
close, the closing, right?
Of the consideration for the conveyance.
Mhm.
I'm not a legalese person, but doesn't that mean purchase price?
Yep.
So for a $500,000 piece of property, that comes to $3,750.
It's pretty big for our neck of the woods.
Mm, yeah.
Because we do have some, $20 million
Point
properties.
0.075% comes to $375. I mean, you can
So I'm not
really, you
suggesting
can,
anything, but that's
No,
what
but
they
Yeah,
do.
that's what they do, and apparently it's legal, it's never been
Yep.
challenged.
and you can play with the figure, you
Article
know?
331F of New York tax law allows it, whatever that says.
There you go. Scripture and verse.
So, and this isn't like a proposal, this is what they do,
Mm-hmm.
and that's how they grow their fund. I can't remember how, I looked at it a couple years ago, it was millions that they had. We have 1.3 million right now,
3,000.
I think, in our
On
open space fund.
Well, it's not just the people that live here, it's the visitors that
Oh,
come.
yeah.
I mean, I talked to a lot of them working at Sonnenberg Gardens, and all the things that come out of their mouth are, it's beautiful, and, use all the words you want, but they're basically talking about the natural scenery always.
I see more and more kayaks, not just mine in my car outside, but more and more car racks and kayaks every year. Now, that's anecdotal certainly, but I don't remember seeing so many, coming day trippers, and they're
Day
shopping,
trippers,
and they're eating, and they're drinking, and they're shopping, and that's a good thing.
But more than that, we have a place on the city pier and I sit down there and read a lot. So I talk to people that come from all over the place. And they talk about hiking Upper Ononda, which totally surprises me. I'm, like, well, how do you even know it's there, Yeah, this must be on Parks and Rec. And
People just Google
Just-
hiking
yes.
trails.
yeah, I know,
And it
and
pops up.
it's
Hiking near me.
it blows me away when they say that, or the people walking now from the lake house, whatever they call it, they say, well, they must hand out the trails maps or
Maybe.
parks maps, because they say, well, we're going to go do this, we're going to go do that. That's all stuff that we have created from vacant land that has this just basic beauty that people appreciate.
I'm up there a lot, marking trees, doing some trail work, just,
Yeah.
off the book stuff. And I've gotten in great conversations with several groups of people in the parking lot. They're from Pennsylvania, they're from Connecticut, one group was from Ontario. Okay, they found it on all trails. But they
Yeah.
also
Yeah.
dug a little deeper and found anecdotal descriptions or accounts by people, reviews by people. And it's so satisfying.
You know where the least likely people to find like a Miller Park? Town residents. Because I just did senior pictures in Miller Park and Onondaga Park, and people are like, oh, where is this? I'm like, Miller Park, and they're like, what is that? It drives me insane. But anyway.
It's great for snowshoeing, it's a fantastic snowshoeing.
Oh, yeah, I guess it would be.
It's a great
Yeah.
workout, but anyway.
Well, maybe we can consider a transfer tax as part of our funding sources when we start talking about
Yeah.
funding.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, we've been talking
And I
about
think
that since the
Tom
inception.
Tom
but-
Schwartz he's had a lot to say, but I think he sort of promoted something along that line, some
I mean,
sort
on
of tax.
Personal note,
Open
I like
space
the
tax.
idea, the hard thing is
The
how much?
Yeah,
Well,
What's too
million-
much, what's not enough?
Well, you know-
1% of $1 million is 10,000, so that's
that, and
that's too
that's a
much.
lot.
Yeah,
It is.
that's too
and-
much, so.
I would suggest we would start out small.
Mhm.
And have a cap, so it would be a percentage of the first $1 million of the purchase price. I mean, you know,
Yeah, anything over 500 with,
as much as I have an
You know, keep-
opinion of, never mind, I'm not
Yeah.
gonna say it on recording.
that's a different conversation.
That's, I don't believe we should rape lakefront people with a fee. You know, that, because they're enjoying that beauty all the time, they have it, but whatever.
They're paying
But
for
you
it.
know, you think we should, okay, you say it.
Well, they're paying for it in both the
Okay,
purchase
so
and the
question.
taxes.
I think it's cleaner to have a straight number.
Yeah, straight number for
Does-
all town like that, you have to be
Let's
equitable.
start out small and
Well,
work our
I
way
would.
up.
I have a different question. You know, we're talking about this policy. Do we need to stop talking about the policy and move to funding sources first?
I think it's a critical part of it, and I don't believe it's been covered.
Well, it's been talked
Sufficiently.
about.
I think we gotta get the
Yeah.
policy, which funding is part of it, and we can double back
And
and,
you can amend the
Work on the
policy if
funding.
we develop some sort of
Yeah.
funding.
well, or I don't think, how much detail you're gonna get into in the,
Well, you wouldn't.
you wouldn't, no.
The one
There's a
doesn't
policy.
have anything to do with the other, really.
Yeah,
So
we're talking about a transfer tax,
the policy would
along
still
with the open
talk about
space.
using the open space fund. It wouldn't talk about
How we
how the
fund
open
that?
space fund receives its money.
May
how we
I-
fund that is,
May I briefly interject? If your audience for this document is the town board, I think right now, as a town board member, it may not make sense, but the most important thing is identifying the properties, because I think like right now, we have money to spend. The question isn't how to spend the money or where to find the money. We find that when we find a property, it's whether or not it makes sense to spend the money. I think it would be very useful to have specific things outlined as to what is the opinion of the town on where we need to invest money. That I think is what is the most important thing right now, because that's what people are, they get direction, but if it's more specific.
Yeah, so the policy, well, and some of that changes with every parcel. So the policy's not gonna say more than using these
Not the
resources, you would, that's how we identify. Not when
But
something
you-
comes to us already,
Yeah.
but like, you know, the other side of this is developing a list of parcels that the town should have interest in.
You were talking about updating the maps earlier.
Yes.
Is there a way to combine maps and see, okay, X property is on 1, 2, 3, 4 lists
That's
as
our October
importance?
21st discussion.
Okay,
Right.
yeah, I'm like, that is, if there's a way to find maybe an encore, so that it's not like some published list somewhere, or something in Encore that says, you know, XYZ property meets 7 criteria for conservation easement.
But the policy's still, again, the policy's not gonna say
Important,
that.
No, and.
Right, but
yeah.
it's gonna lead you to your resources, you know, whatever your resources say, and that's part of it too, like on the,
And I think
the
you could
list of
privately
resources.
identify to the town board, just so you know, these 10 properties are.
well, it wouldn't
are
be private, it
prioritized.
would be a map, a public
Okay,
town map. I mean, we've already got one.
yeah,
It's, the idea is kind of like that and some of these other maps, but,
But we agreed at our last
Yeah.
meeting that the maps
they
needed to
need
be
some help,
somehow,
and that's what we're
yeah.
gonna talk about
They-
at the October
They
meeting.
need some expansion and perhaps including all of the pieces in one map, which I think would be great.
But
Right,
regardless
yeah.
of that,
Yeah.
this policy could still move along in this
Mhm.
drafting process, as we also work on those pieces.
Because once we have a good idea of these properties and what distinct values they bring, once we
You
find a way to
still-
create a matrix or a guide to that, we'll have this in place. This sounds like it's more like a decision tree.
It is, like, I don't know if you're familiar, you are, I know, and some of you are, on the website, lists all of the town's policies and procedures for how we go about doing things, how the board goes about making decisions, or how the staff goes about, operational decisions. So that's where this would come into play, not necessarily how you decide on the property. That's comes down to the maps and the other resources, but what to do with it and how to obtain it and what those rules might look like.
And
Or
who to
standard
who to
process more than
contact
rules.
and what the different steps are.
That
and
is that other document for the landowners with who to contact.
Mhm.
This would be from the town board's perspective, looking at the
I
property.
see.
Now we're up to spinning four plates. Document for the public.
Yeah.
Policy tree or decision-making tree for the board.
Right, because we
Yeah.
can provide information to landowners, but at the same time, it is, I mean, I don't know, as a town board member, is it helpful when there's a document that kind of lays it out? Because it kind of gives direction.
The pushback is usually from feeling like you're not getting enough public opinion on something, or there's not enough knowledge from enough people showing that they
Well,
want
that's-
X, Y,
we
Z.
always have that problem with
That's the
people
pushback.
not showing up, but that's to do with like,
Honestly, I sit
public
and
workshops
I
and
look
stuff.
at why the McJanet North property was a 10-minute decision.
it
of the
also was
entire board.
cheaper.
It was cheaper, but I look at that and I say, why was that a 10? What was it about that made that for everybody a no-brainer? You know,
Because it was cheaper.
well, that of
Yeah.
course.
Because,
But I
and
think other
because
things
of,
too. It's
because of the
identified.
trails
Yeah.
issue in the parks plan, and because of the Vista
But that is
piece of property
Yeah,
on
there's
the
a lot of
other
history
side
in
of the
that
street.
area.
Yeah, and
The
didn't the owner have
whole
another option?
area, adding to an area that
He had another
already
option,
is
didn't
appropriate,
We had to move because otherwise it
and
would
we
have been
had
sold
to,
privately.
we had to.
Yeah.
But
So-
that is the same, other than monetary issues, that's the same with some of the other properties that we have looked at, where they've been identified in a Trails Master Plan, they've been identified in a Parks Master Plan, they've been identified as a land of conservation value, and I think you're right, it just comes down to money.
That helped
So-
you make that
And
quick
not
decision.
just,
I
I mean, it's in that part, we can't put all those decisions
Mhm.
into a policy. It comes down to money, the timing,
Mhm.
and how
Who's on
people
the
are
board.
feeling in the moment. So that part we can't put in a document,
This
but
thing would also be helpful for new board members. It would be helpful, I think, in some of the grant applications you have, because they probably ask, do you have a policy for?
they do,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
always have to say, no. I
Yeah.
mean, yes, we've done this
So,
before, but
all the
no, we
worry-
don't have a
Mhm.
specific policy.
Get something on the books.
Okay, well, we're coming up on 11, so my work before we meet next, hopefully within the next week or two, is I'll work on some of the organization parts of this policy that you guys suggested, and I'll send you out a revised version. I know our next meeting, we're gonna be talking with Barbara Johnston from Labella, and I don't wanna use that meeting to talk about this. But maybe in the interim, you guys can shoot me back feedback, like you did before, and then, follow up at our November meeting with this.
Okay.
And then,
Could we take the words trash, debris, and chemical pollutants?
yes, so
Out of it.
actually, and we can
Just
actually
use the word
go through-
pollutants.
Gary Cokersberger suggested that too. He
Okay.
sent me back some suggestions that I incorporated it, cause a lot of it
Sounds
was
so
just,
harsh.
yeah, wording and,
Okay, we'll get it to you.
yeah, and some clarification. So what I'll send to you guys, hopefully next week, will be a cleaned up version of this, reorganized. And then
Yeah.
if you guys can send me back, no, I don't like this, yes, I like it, move this here, take that out, those kinds of feedback. It's really helpful, because otherwise I just think you love it.
Quick question, is that our Canandaigua watershed map?
That is one of them. We have more than one.
Okay, because it's referenced in the definition of water course, I didn't,
We have,
We're defining that type C streams thing,
Yeah.
class C streams thing now, but.
so there's a watershed map over there by MRB Group. And then there's this one over here by Labella.
Yep.
MRB's map
that's watershed.
defines the watersheds and the sub-watersheds within the Canandaigua Lake watershed. And this one over here really only defines the Canandaigua Lake watershed. But
Okay,
But we have multiple maps
To me,
that
it
talk
sounded like it
about
was one
water.
map, okay,
Yeah.
gotcha, I got you, I'm
um,
done.
But anyway, okay, well, so look for an email from me in the next week or so with an updated policy, and then in between meetings, if you guys could get back to me on your thoughts about it, I'd really appreciate it. We won't go over this at the next meeting, we'll talk about maps, and then we'll take it from there.
21st, right? October.
Yes, October 21st.
Maps will be a good one.
Sarah,
Yeah.
just to follow up on something from last meeting, did the letter to the board from our group go out?
Yes, it
Yes,
did,
yes,
so
it
it
did.
went out as an attachment to the agenda
Okay.
under the reports of this group.
Okay,
The ECB also sent a letter in the agenda that
Yeah.
supported your letter that you had written.
Yeah, and
So-
they went in together underneath the report sections from the group, so yes, it absolutely did.
And just so you know, everybody, we're on the 21st next week at the budget meeting, we're going to be voting on that option to purchase. So that's the final decision day. So-
Yeah, your agenda come out this
It did?
afternoon.
Oh, it's going out.
Yeah, I haven't sent it yet, but you'll get it.
Is that a public meeting?
Yes,
Yes.
please come.
Yeah, it was a special town board meeting.
Yeah, it's
Or-
intended as a budget workshop meeting, but there's gonna be a couple resolutions
Did you
too.
put it in the beginning? I said to put it in the beginning.
It's the first one.
So it'll be right at the beginning, so.
Is
I
it
figured-
Is it Monday?
It's
Wednesday, I think?
Wednesday, the
21st.
21st, in this room, right?
Yeah, it's over here.
We're just sitting
That's
the
the-
gallery chairs?
Yeah,
So-
cause it was intended as a budget workshop, but now there's a few action items on the agenda too. Okay, well, for this group, I think we can wrap up for today. Thank you. Thanks,
you.
Adeline, for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks
Sorry to
everybody
interject
for
so
the
much.
feedback.
No, this is great.
And we'll, yeah, I'll send out a note next week and I'll see you all again in a month.
sounds good. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
bye.
Not soon.
Bye-bye.
Go see if Jean is in her office and ask about